Welcome to the Sports Scouting Report podcast with Lee Brecheen.
3, 2, 1, we're recording. Hi, everyone. Glad that you can join us today. This is the Sports Scouting Report. I'm your host, Lee Brecheen. Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday. Today's topic is LSU. We're talking about the recruiting class for LSU for the class of 2021, and it's not finished. And I'm going to go ahead and in this segment, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the class, and then we'll go through the whole class one by one. But I'm going to go ahead and give you my 3 cents on this LSU football class. First of all, considering the season LSU had, with 3 wins mostly during the majority of the season prior to the Florida upset, the Ole Miss win, which was really needed, to finish a respectable 5-5, avoid a losing season, just coming off a national championship in 2019. A lot of distractions. All the momentum basically killed from the championship season. Could have been better. Could have been a disaster. And let me explain that. Could have been a disaster. I'll start with that. LSU could have lost most of this class because of social media and other distractions and the season, and everybody's just, Debbie Downer. Everybody's just real negative and critical. That's what happens when you have a losing season. Plus, you have coaches that are leaving, assistants that are leaving, coaches that are being talked about are going to get fired. The coaches, parents read this, kids see that, and then you lose some commitments. Kids that you recruit 2, 3, 4 years. And I think you learn a lot if you're Ed Orgeron. But it could have been a disaster. So they avoided the disaster and finished with one of the top 5 classes. Now, it's not finished, but they have a chance to finish as one of the top 5 to 7 classes in the country after February 3rd, the second signing date. Considering, again, everything that was going on, which was negative, one of the worst years in the history of LSU, they were able to pull off potentially one of the top 5 recruiting classes in the country. And let me explain what could have been. What could have been the greatest class in the history of LSU. But that's not going to happen. But if you look at the positives, you avoided a disaster. You kept the program at a level, talent-wise, to compete for championships and to still sign some players in the second signing period to maybe even elevate your class possibly as one of the top 3 or top 2 classes in the country. And I'm not going by national recruiting rankings. I'm going by what they're getting in Louisiana, what they're getting overall, and their needs. And LSU needs everything. But I thought their biggest needs were, after the season, were running backs, D linemen, linebackers, and DBs. And then replenish every position. Now, a lot of people say, Lee, why are you not talking about offensive linemen? Well, LSU signed 3 offensive linemen in 2019. The Dummerville kid from Florida, who's about 6'5", about 310, that's going to be a phenomenal tackle. You could say technically redshirted, even though everybody gets a year back. He didn't play this year, but he's going to be a great tackle. Xavier Hill from Olive Branch, Mississippi, 6'3", 295-pound guard with 5 flat in the 40s, is going to be a great player. You see where I'm going with this? The need on O-line. People forgot what they signed last year. They kind of forgot about that. And then they got the kid Marlon Martinez, who played a little bit this year for LSU. He's going to be a great center. He'll be your next center if Liam Shanahan comes back from Harvard, which I think he'll be a heck of a center next year, having a year to get under his belt in the SEC without a spring practice this past year. So I don't think the offensive line, I think if LSU can get a couple of players in the second signing period, it'll give them 3. And they've got a really strong nucleus of offensive linemen coming back. Again, 3 players nobody saw this year play that were freshmen that will be really good. I think Xavier Hill, Marcus Dumerville from Florida, and Marlon Martinez will be incredible players for the offensive line in the future. So where did LSU miss on this class? They could have stockpiled their defensive line. They lost a kid on signing day to Alabama, defensive end out of Vero Beach, Florida, Keenan Knott, who's a pass rushing specialist. It happens. But on the positive side, they did sign 2 pass rushers that have a chance to be incredible players. Xavier Carter from Atlanta, Georgia, the same high school that Arden Key went to. Xavier Carter, 6'4", about 210, runs about a 4.6. And by the time he gets to campus, he'll probably be about 220. And I know they'll probably get him up to about 240 before he leaves. He can play as a freshman at 220, at 6'4", just rushing the passer, kind of like what Marcel Brooks did a year ago from Texas in 2019. The other defensive end, who technically did sign his papers, he just didn't announce the early signing period, is Savion Jones, the St. James defensive end, St. James, Louisiana. Savion Jones, for all that's listening to this podcast, let me just say one thing. The kid is the best player in the state of Louisiana, hands down. No one's close. Savion Jones is 6'5" in height, 240 pounds, and has more potential than Arden Key and Chasson put together. If you thought Arden Key was a good defensive end at LSU, and you thought Chasson was a good defensive end, and Donnell Hunter, this kid has a chance to be on the same page as Donnell Hunter when he's done growing. He's got a chance to be one of those 270-pound DNs at 6'5" that can run a 4.6. Right now he runs a 4.5 in the 40. And what I like about Savion Jones is that he brings it every play, and he's God-gifted. He's got one of the quickest first steps off the ball as a pass rusher that I've seen in a long time. He's got a chance to be great. And he's what LSU needs. LSU needs a pass rusher, another one, to go with B.J. Alderere, who played this year from Atlanta, Georgia. They'll have 2 of them next year. Now, you'd like to have 3 or 4 like Alabama, but, again, at least you brought another great pass rusher in that's not a project. Just remember that name, Savion Jones. He signed technically on signing day. He's not going to announce it and make it official until February the 3rd. And so having one of the top 5 classes in the country potentially could end one of the top 2 or 3, avoided disaster. They did lose some great players, LSU did, on signing day because of the season they had, and it's just the way recruiting works. The top linebacker in California and in the country, Rashawn Davis, out of Mater Dei High School in California, he didn't sign with anybody. He was supposed to sign with LSU. LSU recruited this kid for 3 years. 3 years. And it looks like he's going to go to Ohio State now or USC. Another kid they've been recruiting for 2 years didn't sign on signing day, and he's leaning to Oklahoma and Ohio State as well, is a kid named Tristan Lee, who's 6'5", 290, and runs a 4.9 40. He's very similar to Jedrick Willis, who played at Alabama, and he's currently with the Cleveland Browns. So that, the class could have been special. You could have brought in the Davis kid, but, if you look at it, With the way opt-outs are going now and the way kids are leaving programs, do you really want the kids that didn't sign, that didn't want to come just because you had an off year? Did LSU really avoid disaster in many ways by not getting kids who didn't want to come, truly? Were they just caught up into the national championship game? Were they just caught up into the playoffs of last year? I think so. I think the kids that LSU got, and this is the first time I would ever say this, but they signed the kids that wanted to come to LSU. And that's really been an LSU theme over 50 years. If you don't want to come, don't come. But this is the most important time because of opt-outs and because of opt-outs during the season, before the season, and kids wanting to go pro very early and not even play their junior year. So kudos to all the kids that did sign with LSU, and not just sign, but they avoided disaster. And they've got a chance to finish as one of the top 2 or 3 recruiting classes in America. You got to take your hat off to Coach Ed Orgeron doing this, knowing that his staff would be not intact for the next season. He would have to fire a lot of coaches. Some coaches are going to retire. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to go through the rest of the class, and we're going to start with running backs when we come back. I thought LSU signed the best running back class in the country. Not a really big-time topic with LSU fans because, with John Emery and all the running backs they have on the team, Ty Davis, all the backs, they didn't have a great year at running back. Stability wasn't there, which didn't help the offensive line, which did not help the run game. But boy, did LSU solve that problem. We'll be right back and talk about those top running backs. Listen, whatever you're driving right now, Tommy Harvey wants it. Bring it in to Harvey Subaru, Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City, or John Harvey Toyota. They're paying big bucks for all trades right now. They'll cut you a check right there. Tell them Lee sent you. Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm Lee Brecheen, your host. Our topic today is the LSU football recruiting class, the class of 221. Which I think ended up being phenomenally good considering it could have been a disaster. And again, it could have been the greatest class ever, but like I mentioned in my opening dialogue, you don't really want these kids that really wasn't sold on LSU and they've never really been to LSU much because of COVID-19. You might have avoided a disaster by maybe losing kids that would have left real soon. And if kids aren't sure about where they want to go to college, then you're okay. You bring in kids that do want to go to your school. But LSU signed 2 phenomenal running backs in this class. And I think it's going to change the team in 2021. It's 2 big-time running backs coming in. You got to take your hat off to Kevin Falk. This was Kevin Falk's first year to recruit for LSU as the running backs coach. Kevin landed 2 of the top running backs in the country, 2 of the top 100 prospects in the country. 2 kids that don't come from Louisiana that I think sometimes you need to go out of state to get a running back. Even though I will say there are some good running backs in Louisiana. Kevin Falk went into Alabama and got a kid by the name of Armani Goodwin, who's a carbon copy of Kevin Falk. He looks like Kevin Falk, runs like Kevin Falk when Kevin was at Karen Crow. Armani is 5'8", 190 pounds of muscle, and he's built very similar to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He runs a 4.4 in the 40. He's one of the top 3 or 4 players in the state of Alabama. He was offered by Alabama early. He didn't want to go to Alabama. And he was committed to Auburn for about 6 months, or almost about 7 months. And when Auburn fired their coach, Gus Malzahn, Armani opened up his recruitment, and Kevin had been recruiting him the whole time. Armani's going to give LSU several looks on the offense. He's an all-purpose back. He's a speedster. They need a guy that can hit the hole with a burst. They didn't have that this year. Todd Davis didn't have it, neither did John Emery. But Armani Goodwin is going to be phenomenal because he's so fast. He's built. He's stocky, but yet he's very fluid, and he's loose in the hips, and he can really be a phenomenal player. And the other running back that they signed, because of Kevin Falk, was a kid by the name of Corey Keiner from Cincinnati, Ohio. Corey's, again, a carbon copy of a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Short, stocky, fast, explosive, 5'9", about 205 pounds. They list him at 5'10". He's about 5'9". You know, Clyde was listed at 5'10". He was, Clyde's 5'7". Not that made a difference, right? But when these two running backs are going to change the LSU offense next year. Because if Todd Davis is not where he needs to be, or John Emery, you got two backs that are. And then you've got the young running back, Keantre Bradford, if you noticed against Ole Miss, the true freshman from Lancaster, Texas, around Dallas. Keantre Bradford's going to be a heck of a running back. He didn't even get to play the whole season, but they had to play him in basically the final two games of the season against Florida and Ole Miss because everybody was hurt. And he played, you could tell he played tight, not trying to make a mistake like a lot of young kids do. But just between Keantre Bradford, who's about 6 foot 200, and now you got Corey Keiner, and then you got Armani Goodwin, just these three, and then you throw in Todd Davis and John Emery. You've got 5 really good running backs that have elevated that position. And it's going to make the offensive line look a lot better because now you've got some explosive backs. Because John Emery's been fighting injuries for 2 years, and Ty has been fighting injuries. I think Ty is going to always be a great second guy on the team, a rotation back with power. But the LSU didn't have the explosiveness at running back. Nobody talked about that this year. It really hurt LSU. If LSU would have had these two running backs that they signed this past year, you probably win the Missouri game, the A&M game, and possibly the Mississippi State game starting out because you would control the clock and limit how much the other offense would get the ball. They didn't have that this year. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the quarterback LSU signed. One of the best quarterbacks in the country. And LSU's already good at quarterback, but they're loading up to where they have quarterbacks coming up like Ohio State usually has. We're going to talk about the rest of the LSU football recruiting class. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm your host, Lee Brecheen. We'll be right back. Looking for a used car? Harvey Autos has 3 dealerships, which means 3 times the used vehicles. They've got everything from fuel-efficient compacts to luxury models, even hybrids, and certified pre-owned with a warranty. Check out John Harvey Toyota, Harvey Subaru, or Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City. Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm your host, Lee Brecheen. Today's topic is the LSU, Louisiana State University's football recruiting class for the class of 221, which is not finished. At the end of the show, we'll talk about who's left, how I think they might finish, and who they're still recruiting, and maybe a name or two to look for in the end from Louisiana that they might get. But continuing on with LSU's football recruiting class, they signed 1 quarterback. It's a kid by the name of Garrick Nussmeier. I met his dad about 20 years ago doing video filming, and I worked with his dad, who was a quarterback for the Saints, was a heck of a quarterback in college. And his dad played in NFL a long time, but he was also a coach at Michigan State. When he was at Michigan State, I worked with him in recruiting. Great guy. Dad's about 6'4", played at about 220. Garrett Nussmeier right now is about 6'1", about 182. And you might say, well, he's not very tall. Well, he reminds me a lot of Brett Favre. Brett Favre, coming out of high school out of Mississippi, was very explosive with his feet in the pocket and had a great arm. highly intelligent. You know, Brett Favre was a coach's kid. Garrett Nussmeier, his dad being a coach, he's a very mature kid, and he's still growing. I know that's a saying that you hear a lot, still growing, but in this case, he really is, because his dad is 6'4", and I think he might end up being about 6'2" in height. But even if he stays 6'1", he's got some special skills. He's a dual threat. Sometimes he looks a little bit like a Johnny Manziel in the pocket. He can escape the rush. He makes all the right reads. He's mature. He's not a quarterback that's a project. He's a guy that's ready to be a difference maker. And I think what Garrett Nussmeier brings to LSU is that they have Max Johnson, who I think is going to be the quarterback of the future, that we all saw against Ole Miss and Florida. What he's done is super impressive. And you got Miles Brennan that might come back. I don't know if Miles Brennan can even beat out Max Johnson. That's my thoughts. I think Max does everything the offense needs. Miles Brennan doesn't move well, and he was like 2 for 30 on third downs when he did play this year because he can't move. He can't get the third downs. You saw Max do that. He got those 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 1s running the ball. So Garrett Nussmeier, you might say, would redshirt. I don't think so. I think the potential is TJ Finley could end up leaving the program if Max Johnson's named the starter. Miles Brennan could get beat out and leave. And then you would have Garrett Nussmeier and Max Johnson. And I think Garrett would play. Garrett would be in a role to where he could come in and be that 4-5 in the 40 kid. Or you would get him some playing time in case Max Johnson got hurt. But LSU would have 2 great quarterbacks. And it would be many years. When's the last time LSU had 2 great quarterbacks that could lead LSU to championships and have a freshman that could do it as well? That's what Garrett Nussmeier brings to the table. If they need him to be great, he can play right away. If they have an injury to Max Johnson, he could redshirt and be the future. It's a great position to be in for LSU. LSU signed a punter, and he's one of the best punters in the United States. Actually, he's one of the best punters I've ever seen play high school football. His name is Peyton Todd from West Monroe High School. Peyton Todd is 6'5" in height, about 225 in weight. And when the ball comes off his foot, it's like it comes out of a ball machine. You ever see those ball machines that you put the ball in and it shoots out of the machine and it goes, you can't even see it when it hits the sky? That's Peyton Todd. He's the best to come out of Louisiana since Donnie Jones of Catholic of Baton Rouge. Donnie had a 14-year NFL career. He's more advanced than Donnie. He's bigger than Donnie, and he's got a stronger leg than Donnie. Zach Von Rossenberg is going to go to the NFL and I think make a team at the age of 30, or what is he, 35? I'm kidding, Zach. He's 30 years old, almost 31. But Peyton Todd's actually got a stronger leg than Von Rosenberg, who's got a very good leg. Peyton Todd's the same height as Zach Von Rosenberg, who's 6'5" as well. Peyton Todd was an all-state linebacker in 2019 at 6'5", 225 pounds. He's a very physical punter. He's not a punter you want to try and hurt or try to tackle or block a punt. He's tough. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about linebackers, a position of need for LSU. They might end up signing another linebacker, but we're going to talk about the linebacker or 2 linebackers LSU did sign when we come back. So, hey, guys, just wanted to take a minute to tell you about Harvey Autos. If you need a new or used car, there's 3 great dealerships right here worth checking out. John Harvey Toyota, Harvey Subaru, and Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City. Low prices, honest people. Tell them Lee sent you. Welcome back. You listen to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm your host, Lee Brecheen. Today's topic is the LSU football team's recruiting class of 2021. It's not the full class because it was only the first signing day. There's a second signing day, February the 3rd. They did really good. We talked about that in segment 1, but we're going to continue on and talk about linebackers. This 2020 LSU football team really lacked linebackers. Losing Patrick Queen was tough. You just realize how good Patrick Queen was to this LSU team the last 2 years. He tackled everybody in the center of the field and outside. And that's where LSU was hurting all year. It took them a while. They ended up getting it right as time went on, but it was too late. So they had to go out and sign a couple of linebackers to help with depth. Now, again, there's a couple of linebackers that LSU did sign in 2020 that didn't play a lot that will help the team in 2021. 2 linebackers signed this past year, one for Virginia, a kid by the last name of Sampe. He's about 6'1", about 210. He's going to bulk up to about 220. He's built very similar to Patrick Queen. He'll be a good player. Fought some injuries. And they signed a kid out of Houston, Texas this past year named Josh White, who played a lot in the last 2 weeks. He's about 6 foot, about 220. He'll probably be in that 230 range this year coming up. And they've got Damone Clark, who came on a lot late in the year, and a couple other kids. So they needed a couple of linebackers, and they needed a difference maker. So they went to a junior college, Mississippi Gulf Coast Junior College, and signed a kid by the name of Navante Strong, who's about, they list him 6 foot 230. He's probably 5'11" and some change, 230. He was the #1 junior college linebacker in the country. He's a tackling machine. That's what LSU needs. They needed a guy that could come in the spring. He's going to enroll for the spring. And he'll probably be the starter day one at the Mike linebacker spot. And LSU did not really have a true Mike linebacker this year. I think it's going to upgrade the defense. It's going to help him in the middle of the field. And he can also go side to side, run plays, which LSU was hurting for, and also some of those bubble screens he could defend too. They didn't really have anybody that was a true Mike linebacker. So this kid's going to be actually an impact player day one, kind of like the Lewis kid was for LSU that came from a junior college. Damian Lewis, that's now with the Seattle Seahawks for the offensive line. Remember, he came from a Mississippi junior college and ended up being a great player. Hopefully this kid will be the same way. Another linebacker LSU signed, and they held on to him. There was worries they might lose him because he's a national prospect out of Maryland at a famed high school, DeMatha, which is known for basketball too. Kid by the name of Greg Penn III. Greg Penn, P-E-N-N. 6'1", 225 pounds, one of the top 100 players in the country. Greg is similar to Patrick Queen, where he could play outside linebacker and Mike linebacker. He'll play right away because he's a super, super gifted player. He's very cerebral. And LSU needed another linebacker, so they signed 2 linebackers that can come in and help right away. And hopefully LSU will return the rest of their linebackers on the team so they'll have depth. They're not super deep. And I could see LSU try to add a 3rd linebacker possibly if they can get the right 3rd linebacker. Tight ends. LSU didn't really need a lot of tight ends, but they signed a kid from Mississippi, from Olive Branch, Mississippi, by the name of Jalen Sheed. Olive Branch is close to Tennessee, close to Memphis. Olive Branch is one of the top high schools in Mississippi. Jalen's about 6'4", about 240, came out from the basketball team a year ago. Phenomenal, gifted player. Could get up to about 260, 270, and still run about a 4.7 40. And I think Jalen might end up being a defensive end for LSU. He's a guy that played DN in high school and looked very good doing it. So if LSU gets Eric Gilbert back and Nick Stortz comes back from the LSU baseball team, who looked pretty good, and Cole Taylor looked very good from Colorado, the freshman, the shoe guy, they can move Jalen Sheed to defensive end, and that would help the defense. That's my pick here as a future forecast. I think he'll end up being a DN if they can get Eric Gilbert back. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the defensive line, how LSU did at Buck linebacker, which is really your DN pass rushers, and they signed a D tackle, and late they signed a Florida defensive end. And this is a position that I think if they could get a great player, they would add another one in the end. We'll be right back.
Parents, are you looking for advice on getting your high school athlete recruited by the right college? Lee Brecheen is your answer. Lee has been doing it for over 30 years. He knows the ropes, and more importantly, he knows the people. Lee offers turnkey service from evaluation, creating highlight tapes in the correct format, and complete guidelines for effective communication with the schools. No matter the sport, girl or boy, no matter what grade your child is in, let Lee Brecheen help match your child to the right college fit. Go to our website, lafootballmagazine.com, and get connected today.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm your host, Lee Brecheen. Today's topic is the LSU football recruiting class for the class of 2021. You know, defensive line for LSU this past year was supposed to be a phenomenal season, but what happened is they had too many kids opt out for the year, and it put LSU in a crunch with numbers. And LSU had to play the whole year with hardly any backups, which is unfortunate. Tyler Shelvin opted out before the season. Justin Thomas, their big 6'5" defensive end from Alabama, opted out. Their other nose guard, Appa from Utah, opted out. He's since transferred to Baylor. You had a lot of players opt out. Trevez Moore opted out, a defensive end that's now going to Arizona State. LSU lost too much, and then they lost Chasson on top of that to the Jaguars. And they had some kids kicked off the team. Ray Parker from Ruston was kicked off the team, and then Nelson Jenkins opted out. I mean, that was just too much to lose. And then Joseph Evans got hurt at the end this year from Haynesville. So the D-line was not really what I thought it would be for the 2020 season. That hurt the LSU defense. I mean, the whole defense was shredded with opt-outs. And all season, guys that left the program. So LSU needed to go get a dominant D tackle, which they did from Terrebonne High School, Mason Smith. Mason's regarded by a lot of your national websites as one of the top D tackles in the country. Mason has a lot of ability. He can be as good as he wants to be. He's a great kid. Super gifted. He was ranked highly off of his combines. More than his film, more than his game playing. What I mean by that is Mason dominated these camps in shorts and helmet, meaning he had the best times. He had the less body fat. He's like 6'4.5", about 315, and has like 3% body fat. He's academically a phenomenal student. He's a great kid. Runs a 4.840, which is incredible for a guy 315 pounds. He reminds me, though, of Al Woods, who came out of Elton High School about 12 years ago. And he's in the NFL now for 8 years. He doesn't remind me of Glenn Dorsey or Chad Lavallee or Marcus Spears or Claude Roten, any of those great former D tackles at LSU that are dominant, or Kyle Williams. And I'm not saying he can't become those guys. All those guys came out of high school pretty dominant. Mason just needs to turn it up a notch in college, and that might happen. If not, he'll be like Glenn Logan or Al Woods, which those are great players. Glenn Logan, LSU is going to try and talk him into coming back for his extra year, along with Neil Farrell. And again, at worst, Mason Smith will be a Glenn Logan, Al Woods, or Neil Farrell. And I'll take those guys all day long. They don't grow on trees. And so he'll come in and play right away at D tackle, and if he wants to be dominant, he can be. He's a great kid. He's shown those dominant abilities in high school. He's shown flashes of it. So what do we talk about at defensive end? LSU almost signed the best defensive end group in America. But they lost the kid not to Alabama from out of Vero Beach, Florida. They had a kid committed that was 6'4", 220. The good news is they signed two of the best defensive ends in the country and added a third buck linebacker DN and Xavier Carter, who we talked about earlier out of Georgia, who's 6'4", about 215. But the two true DNs that they signed have a chance to be amazing. Landon Jackson from Pleasant Grove High School in Texarkana, Texas, is 6'6". They list him at 240, but I know he's 262 because that's what his coach told me 6 weeks ago. So you got a kid 6'6", 262, that benches 415 pounds. He runs the 40 in 4.49 seconds. That's right, 4.49 seconds. He was the player of the year in Texas in Class 4A in 2019. 220, he got hurt. He missed his senior season, basically. Landon Jackson reminds me of a taller version of Joey Bosa. You know, the Bosa brothers at Ohio State and also in the NFL. Landon, the reason LSU was able to get him is because both his parents went to McNeese State, and they have Louisiana ties. He was offered by every college in the United States, including Alabama and Notre Dame that are in the playoffs, and Clemson. And they were able to hold off A&M, who had a great year. But Landon Jackson is going to come into LSU day one and be a pass rusher and a dominant force for LSU. And he's going to weigh about 275 when he's done filling out, running about a 4.6. He's a different type of player. LSU hasn't had a Landon Jackson. He's unique. He'll tip a lot of passes. He's super long. He's got long arms. He's super physical. He's going to be a leader, too. I think LSU will sign Savion Jones, the other defensive end, from St. James High School, who did not announce on the first signing day. I talked about Savion Jones in the opening. He's 6'5", 245, runs a 4.5 40, the best player in Louisiana. And I think he's going to be better than Chasson for LSU. He's going to be better than Arden Key. He's going to be better than Gabe Northern. And he's going to be better than any pass rusher LSU's possibly ever had. Savion Jones is an incredible football player from St. James. So if you throw in Landon Jackson, Xavier Carter, and Savion Jones, and Mason Smith, and also they picked up a late signee in the early signing period as a DN, a strong side DN, a big guy, by the name of Bryce Langston from Ocala Vanguard High School in Ocala, Florida. This is the same high school that Dante Culpepper went to. Remember Dante Culpepper, the quarterback that played in the NFL for many years? Went to Central Florida University. Bryce Langston turned down Alabama and Florida Gators to go to LSU. Bryce is one of the top 10, 15 kids in the state of Florida. Some people say he's one of the top 5 players. He's 6'2", 270 pounds, and runs a 4.7 40. And he can end up being a big guy one day at 290 playing inside, or he can stay at strong side DN. Excuse me, I got to get some water. But if you look at this D-line group, it's one of the best they've signed since Ed's been on the job. They needed pass rushers. They needed a dominant D-tackle to come in, and they got that. When we come back, I'm going to talk about wide receivers for LSU that were signed in the class. They signed some very talented kids. We'll be right back. Listen, whatever you're driving right now, Tommy Harvey wants it. Bring it in to Harvey Subaru, Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City, or John Harvey Toyota. They're paying big bucks for all trades right now. They'll cut you a check right there. Tell them Lee sent you. Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I'm Lee Brecheen, your host. Today's topic is the LSU football recruiting class for 2021. We're going to talk about wide receivers. You know, you've got to keep the wide receiver position stocked at LSU in any college, because when they pan out, they go pro early. So LSU loses Racy McMath, who's playing in the Senior Bowl. That's why he's not coming back. They lose Terrace Marshall, who opted out. They lose Jamar Chase, who opted out. And potentially John Trey Kirkland potentially might not come back. So that's 4 receivers potentially. That's a lot. 3 of those guys will play in the NFL. 3 of those guys will be NFL starters. 2 will be possibly in the first round. Definitely in the first 2 rounds, 2 of them. If McMath has a good Senior Bowl, he'll be drafted maybe in the top 4 or 5 rounds. You have Keishawn Butte coming back, which makes LSU fans feel really good. He is phenomenal. I watched him play at Westgate High School in New Iberia. Was a phenomenal player in high school. LSU also returns J. Ray Jenkins, who did some great things. He had a great touchdown against Florida this year and had showed flashes of brilliance in his first year playing a lot. J. Ray 6'4", about 210, from Gina, Louisiana. They also have Coy coming back from Archbishop Rummel, who played really good this year down the stretch for LSU. Coy Moore. And they have some other receivers. But this was a key. They needed to stockpile the position, and they did. They signed one of the top wide receivers in the country out of Jackson, Mississippi, a kid by the name of Deion Smith. Deion played a senior at Jackson Academy because his high school, Jackson Provine, didn't have football this year. So he went to a private school and played his senior year. And when you watch film on Deion Smith, he looks like a lot of the great receivers that have come out of LSU. He's got a lot of Beckham speed. He's got a lot of ability. I mean, he's 6'1", about 180, and he can fly, and he's super gifted. He's very similar to Butte, actually. Can you imagine having Butte, Deion Smith, J. Ray Jenkins, Coy Moore, and then they signed Jack Besh, one of the top receivers I've seen play in Louisiana in 30 years, from St. Thomas More High School in Lafayette. Jack is 6'2", about 215 in weight, carries it well, has great hands. Nobody has better hands than Jack. He's probably one of the most physical receivers I've ever seen when the ball's in the air. His vertical's about a 37. He's super strong, benches over 350 pounds. And he loves LSU. Jack Besh will play for LSU immediately because he runs great routes. He's a big receiver that's physical, and he can run. On the field, he looks 4'4". Like Jerry Rice that played back at Mississippi Valley in the 49ers. Never ran but a 4'6" all day long, but it was a 4'6" for 100 yards. And looked 4'4". So you got Jack Besh coming in. You got Deion Smith coming in at receiver. And by the way, you got Chris Hilton signing with LSU from Zachary High School. He's another slot receiver, built like a Jarvis Landry. And as he gets bigger, as he gets stronger, he'll be a better blocker in college. He's a tough kid. He's a big playmaker. Chris Hilton, with his track background, he's a 4'4", 40 guy. He's 5'11" to 6 feet, about 175 pounds. And all of these kids can play different positions if needed. Deion could be a corner. Chris Hilton could be a corner in time. If needed, it might be there, if they could play that position. Jack Besh could be one of your flex tight ends, kind of like Thaddeus Moss. He can end up being that guy too. And by the way, they might get Brian Thomas from Walker High School before this is said and done for the second signing period, who's 6'4", 205 pounds, and runs a 4'4", 40. Reminds me of Michael Clayton. Brian Thomas is down to LSU, Alabama, and Texas A&M. And Brian, LSU still needs that tall receiver. They need that big 6'3", 6'4" receiver that you can't guard. They need it. They need that next Terrace Marshall. And I think, Brian, if you're listening to this, they don't have anybody like you on the roster right now at LSU. They've got a bunch of shorter, fast receivers, but they need you, man. 6'4", runs a 4.5 in the 40, has that built like a Julio Jones, could end up being about 220 pounds. And if LSU was to sign Brian Thomas, one of these kids would probably switch to DB in the future. And it would definitely allow LSU, speaking of DBs, there's kind of a hidden fact in this class, because sometimes when you see kids signing as a position, you just look at that position. But like me, I'll watch them play, and I know that the coaches might switch them when they get to campus. But LSU needed some defensive backs really bad. They needed safeties really bad. And they needed a couple of corners because they needed to add depth. They had no depth this year at corner. They had no nickel backs. And they had no safeties. And they did sign a freshman, but he just wasn't ready to play safety. Jordan Tolles from Baltimore, Maryland, who will be a good player. He just wasn't ready. And I think the Harris kid from Plaquemine is probably never going to be a starter, but he had to start this year. He's better off the bench. And the Maurice Hampton kid from Tennessee, he wasn't ready to be a starter. He just didn't know how to play, and he's not a safety, but they had to put him at safety. LSU had to put a lot of players at positions they really couldn't play those positions, but they had nobody to play. They had nobody. It's incredible they finished 5-5. So let's talk about defensive backs that they signed. The first kid, the true corner they signed, is out of Pensacola, Florida. He was committed to Tennessee for a long time, about 6 months. He's out of Pensacola Catholic High School. His name is Demarius McGehee. 6'1", 175 pounds. They list him at 163, but he's 175. Runs a 4.4 in the 40. And he was offered by Auburn and Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, South Carolina. He had a lot of big offers. He's a very good cornerback, a guy that can come in and help. He can be that guy that is ready. You know, he's not a project. Tennessee had him coming in to play for Tennessee as a starter. That's how good he is. The other kid in the class that I think is the other corner, but he's listed as a receiver, is a kid by the name of Malik Neighbors out of school, which they list him at Southside. He transferred to Southside High School in Youngsville, but didn't get to play his senior year because he transferred. He wasn't cleared. But this kid, Neighbors, is a phenomenal football player. He was headed to Mississippi State. LSU got him to decommit from Mississippi State. And at 6'1", 190 pounds, he runs a 4.40. And you notice I've said this 3 times in this class. This is one of the fastest classes that Ed Orgeron has signed. But Malik Neighbors would make a heck of a corner. I'm not saying they're going to move him to corner. I'm just saying he can play corner, and he's played that position in high school. So technically there's possibly 2 cornerbacks, maybe 3 in the class already. Let's talk about safeties. The sleeper safety in the class, long term, I don't know if he'll come in and be an impact right away, but long term is a kid by the name of Matthew Langlois from Point Coupee Catholic in New Roads, Louisiana. Matthew's the first big-time prospect to ever sign D1 from the school that I can remember since the 1980s. He's 6 foot, 185 pounds. I watched Matthew play 3 times, 2 in person. His junior year, I watched him in person. And he played running back, receiver, DB, outside linebacker, punt return, kick return. He did everything. One thing Matthew has is he's tough, committed, and super gifted. Will he be ready to play at 185 at safety, which is not really heavy, but I think he's a strong safety. He's not a free safety. You don't have to be as big. But Matthew Langlois is a tough kid who can run. He runs a legit 4.5 40 or faster. Strong, benches over 310 pounds. and wanted to be an LSU Tiger and turned down Kansas State and Notre Dame and some other big schools. And I like how he's from the local area of Baton Rouge. He's close to campus. He wants to be at LSU. And he'll play special teams right away, if not play safety. They signed some other safeties, and the guy that I like that they signed is a kid by the name of Derrick Davis out of Pennsylvania. Monroeville, Gateway High School, one of the top 5 programs in Pennsylvania. Derrick Davis was ranked as one of the top 3 players in Pennsylvania. It's been 30 years since LSU's taken a top 5 player out of Pennsylvania. 30-something years. Derrick is 6'1", 194 pounds, and also was a running back on a Class 5A team in Pennsylvania. He ran for over 4,000 yards in his career, but he's a safety for college. And he's an impact guy. They needed a safety. LSU needed a free safety badly. And they got the safety they wanted, the free safety they wanted. He's got a chance to come in and start, if not at least rotate with the young Jordan Tolles. And maybe Maurice Hampton will go back to strong safety where he needs to be. And to finish the safety class out, LSU signed a kid by the name of Sage Ryan from Lafayette Christian, who's a phenomenal hitter and will come to LSU as a strong safety. Sage is about 5'10 and a half, about 198 pounds. He reminds me of Ronnie Lott. Some of your older listeners out there, you remember Ronnie Lott, how he was so physical and so gifted and so high IQ of the game? Kind of like a Mike Singletary cerebral football player for DB. You know, the former linebacker for the Bears, how cerebral he was and tough. That's Sage Ryan. When you see Sage, he's not super big, but he packs a punch bigger than most. Alabama wanted him really bad because they saw a lot of what I'm telling you right now. Sage Ryan will come in and, if not start at strong safety, he will be on the field playing special teams as a gunner and be a dominant player, but he's an instant guy to come in at strong safety and probably start again and not be a guy that's a project, not be a guy that needs any work. He's ready to go. Sage played running back his senior year for his team and didn't even play DB because the team needed him as a running back. He's going to play for a state title this week coming for Lafayette Christian. And if you see him on TV, just realize he's not a running back. That's what he's doing to help his team win, and that's the character kid he is. His uncle is Trev Falk. It's Trev's sister's son, the former LSU linebacker from Lafayette High School. Played for the Saints and the Rams, was a great linebacker, got his degree in 3 years, Trev did. Sage Ryan is the same high-character kid that his uncle is. And a guy LSU had to have as a leader and as a phenomenal player. He's kind of like the Patrick Queen of strong safeties, but ready to go right away. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the offensive line. LSU signed one player, but he's a good one. And they look to add 2 more before the second signing day is over in February. We'll be right back. Looking for a used car? Harvey Autos has 3 dealerships, which means 3 times the used vehicles. They've got everything from fuel-efficient compacts to luxury models, even hybrids, and certified pre-owned with a warranty. Check out John Harvey Toyota, Harvey Subaru, or Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City. Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Scouting Report. I hope you're enjoying this show. The passion I have for talking about these kids and what they might do in the future at LSU. LSU's football recruiting class is our topic today for the class of 221. We're almost finished talking about the class, and at the end of this show, I'm going to talk about who's left and who they might go after. Strategy is pretty easy if you know ball. If you know football and you know the roster at LSU and you know what they're losing, you kind of can look at, I can, and like a lot of our listeners, you can look at what they need or what's still needed. But let's go ahead and finish the class out from the early signees. Again, to get everybody up to date, technically 20 players signed early for LSU. Technically 21 if you count Savion Jones from St. James. Wasn't made public and will not be made public till he signs with his teammates. He chooses to sign with his teammates in February the 3rd. And you can actually sign your papers before February 3rd, but just make it public February 3rd. So LSU needs offensive linemen. Not as bad as what you would think. I would say 90% of the fans out there that don't follow the roster, the depth chart, don't really look at what they just signed a year ago. But they did sign 3 offensive linemen that are going to be really good next year that didn't play a lot. And they got a young kid, Perry, from Turlings Catholic, 6'6", about 330, that played a little bit this year as a redshirt freshman. Those are 4 kids, and then if they get Dackless to come back, and they get possibly Ingram to come back, and it's the center, Liam Shanahan from Harvard, if he comes back, then they're going to have a strong nucleus of some young guys. Maybe Bradford will lose his weight from Michigan, who's 6'6", about 360, needs to be about 335. But the COVID hurt him with no spring. There's some other kids like that on the team. Jason Hines has a chance. He got hurt against Florida, but he's got a chance to come back. Some other kids that are on the team as well that are going to have a chance to move up. But the one signee that LSU did get, he's an offensive tackle from Michigan. His name is Garrick Dillinger. 6'5", about 285, almost 6'6". Long arms, runs about a 5 flat and a 40, or a 4.9. He was one of the top 5 football players in the state of Michigan. He turned down Michigan, Ohio State, basically the whole Big Ten, Notre Dame. This guy's legit. He's the biggest pickup from that area since Ethan Posek signed out of Illinois 7 years ago, who's now the starting center for the Seattle Seahawks. Remember Ethan Posek, who's about 6'5", about 310? Ethan was a heck of a player. This is a kid that reminds me of Ethan Posek. He could be a center, a guard, or a tackle. If they need him to play right away, he can. He's not a project. He's gifted. If you watch his film, which I've watched a lot of film on him, he's very gifted. He loves to pull, and you don't find guys almost 6'6" that can pull about 285. And he's strong, uses his hands good, got great feet to be a tackle, could be a guard, could be a center. So LSU needs a couple of more O-linemen, not so much because they need people to come in and play, but they need as many as they can get to compete. And here's what's left. LSU's recruiting 3 offensive linemen right now, and maybe as many as 8 to get 2 more. That's right. I predict LSU to sign 2 more offensive linemen. Eric Wilson is the top transfer offensive lineman right now in the transfer portal from Harvard. He was a teammate of Liam Shanahan's, who's on the LSU team now. Eric Wilson was committed to Auburn, but when they fired Gus Malzahn, he decommitted. Now, Liam Shanahan, believe it or not, who played this year, his first year at LSU from Harvard, he's got a chance to be a pro player. He just learned a position. He never even played center. He played center for LSU because they needed him at center. But his former teammate, Eric Wilson, is 6'4", 310, runs a 4.9 40, former top football player out of the state of Minnesota, scored a 33 on his ACT, and runs, like I said, under a 5 flat and a 40. He's viewed as a pro prospect. If he went pro now, he's looked as a 3rd-round pick. LSU is in the lead to land him right now currently. If they can get Eric Wilson to go with Garrick Dillinger, they're going to look for a 3rd player from the high school ranks. And the guy they would like to sign is out of Niceville, Florida. He was committed to Florida State. He didn't sign on signing day. They've been recruiting him for 6 months. His name is Kimo McAnola. He's 6'4", about 285, runs about a 4.9 40, a great player. Could be a center, guard, or tackle. So if they get Kimo, if they get this kid out of Niceville, Florida, and if they get Eric Wilson to go with Garrick Dillinger, they're going to be set. To finish out the class, I think Logan Diggs, who's committed to Notre Dame out of Archbishop Rummel, or running back, they're trying to convince him to play outside linebacker at LSU like Patrick Queen did out of Livonia. If they get Logan Diggs, that would be a phenomenal marriage, I think, for Logan Diggs. Logan, if you're hearing the show, I would go to LSU and play outside linebacker. I know Notre Dame's a good school, but you got a chance to stay home and join your former teammate Corey Moore, and Jamar Chase played there from LSU at Rummel, and also Craig Stelz, all from Archbishop Rummel. There's another guy that's still around to sign and could be a cornerback in this class and could be a receiver, or it might allow LSU to move a guy to corner if they get him, is Destin Payson from Edna Carr. I know Destin would like to go to LSU. He was committed to Florida State. He didn't sign signing day. He's 6'1", about 190 pounds, runs a 4.40. He's a phenomenal player. He could be a NFL corner or an NFL receiver. I would love to see LSU get Logan Diggs from Rummel and Destin Payson from Edna Carr. These two guys are NFL guys. They're from Louisiana. Their loyalty is going to mean a lot in the end. If there's ever any problems, they're going to stick around. There's also another cornerback out of Stark, Florida. They're recruiting Dante Balfour, who's 6'2", 180. He's been offered by all the SEC schools except Alabama. It's just a matter of how LSU wants to finish it. So I think they'll finish it with 2 offensive linemen. They'll get Savion Jones from St. James. They'll either take a corner, another corner, or another linebacker, and they'll be done. I hope you enjoyed the show today, going over the class. Again, LSU lost some players on signing day. They lost JoJo Earl from Aledo, Texas, a receiver going to Alabama. A phenomenal player. He reminds me of the Waddell, the kid that just got hurt this year from Texas. The Waddle kid, the Jalen Waddle, he's a clone of that kid. But if LSU gets Brian Thomas, they've got one of the greatest receiver classes they've ever signed. They're not going to get Corey Foreman from California, who's probably going to USC or Clemson or some other school. The only player they lost in Louisiana that I thought was going to be a big-time player is Kane Williams from John Ehret. Kaine, Kane Williams. He grew into about a 215-pound, 6'3" linebacker. I've seen Kane play many times. He's phenomenal. He's going to Alabama. He'll be about 230 in about a year, running a 4.5, and he'll be an NFL guy like Dylan Moses. But he just didn't want to come to LSU. Some kids don't. He never wanted to come, and he signed with Alabama. And I think if Dante Starks would have panned out at LSU from John Ehret, he probably would have came to LSU. But when Dante Starks, was kicked off the team in 2019, he decided not to really come to LSU. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it hurts. But considering everything that happened to LSU, like I said in the opening of the show, what a phenomenal class. I want to go ahead and thank our sponsor before we go and before we end the show. And I want to thank my sponsor, John Harvey Toyota, which is incredible people, by the way, Tommy Harvey and his staff at John Harvey Toyota. If you're looking for a used car, Harvey Autos has 3 dealerships, which means 3 times the used vehicles. They've got everything from fuel-efficient compacts to luxury models, even hybrids, and certified pre-owned with a warranty. Check out John Harvey Toyota, Harvey Subaru, or Lexus, or Shreveport, Bossier City. Trust me, these are the incredible people. Tommy Harvey's the owner. They love high school, college football. Support them. They support us. They support you. And be sure to go to our website, lafootballmagazine.com. You can still get your preview, North issues, South issues for this season. And again, I hope our Tiger fans enjoyed the signing class recap of LSU football for the class of 2021. And look, they might also sign a couple of Louisiana guys if they lose on everybody I mentioned that I've seen play. And as they get these guys committed, I'll talk about them because I've seen everybody in Louisiana play backwards and forwards the last 2 to 3, 4 years in the state of Louisiana. Hope everybody has a great Christmas. Merry Christmas to everyone. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, but Merry Christmas. We'll start off with that. We'll be back Monday. Again, everybody have a great weekend and a great Christmas.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Scouting Report podcast with Lee Brecheen.